"There's plenty in the kitchen for Nia," Ellen said. "She can sit over there." Nia stopped in the doorway with the baby on her shoulder. Her little boy was already seated at the center of the table. Claire was beside him, straightening his plate like that seat belonged to her. Grant stood behind them pouring sweet tea, calm and comfortable. And not one person in that dining room told Claire to move. Not one person told the child to make room for his mother. One of Ellen's church friends even patted the empty chair halfway down the table, far from her son, like she was doing something kind. The diaper bag strap bit into Nia's palm. The whole room waited for her to sit where they put her. She walked right past the chair and reached for the little coat hanging by the front door. The sign-out clipboard scraped across the counter before Nia could even shift the baby carrier. Higher on her arm, Grant had already leaned in, one hand flat beside the sheet, his voice calm enough to sound official. Claire stood right at his shoulder like she'd been expected. "Going forward, just send pickup and aftercare stuff through me," he said. "Claire can help with handoff if needed." Heather took the clipboard from him first. That was what landed, not the paper, her hand. The way her eyes went to Grant like he was the clean answer. Nia kept one hand on her toe strap and the other on the carrier handle. Her son stood by the counter with his juice-stained art folder bent against his leg, already watching the adults. "I still need school communication sent to me," Nia said, low and flat. Heather gave a quick professional nod, but she was still looking at Grant when she said she'd update it. The parents behind them stayed quiet. Then Heather turned the clipboard back toward herself with Grant's name sitting first on the line. Claire's trunk was already open at the curb. That was when Nia saw the overnight backpack, small blue one, her son's spare clothes packed and clean, a crumpled school flyer sticking out one pocket, snack cup clipped to the side. Not something somebody threw together after a quick conversation. It had been packed before she got outside. Grant walked their son straight to Claire's back seat and talked over the buckle clicks. Like the weekend had been. Settled days ago, Ellen's for dinner, then back with him. He said it in that easy voice he used when he wanted witnesses to hear cooperation instead of control. Nia stepped closer, the baby carrier heavy on her shoulder. "You didn't ask me." He didn't answer that. He just got their son strapped in, shut the car door, and put a hand on the roof like he was done. A classroom aide coming out behind them slowed for half a second. The other parents looked at the trunk, then away, inside the car. Her little boy turned and looked back through the window at her, and Nia had to stand there and not scare him by turning the parking lot into a fight. Ellen Mercer's dining room was already full when Nia got there. Foil peeled back off casseroles, paper napkins fanned out. Family laughter moving easy around the table like nothing had been done to get everybody in place. Before she arrived, Claire was seated beside Nia's son at the center of it, close enough to straighten his plate and lean toward him when he spoke. Grant stood behind them pouring sweet tea like all of this was perfectly ordinary. Ellen saw Nia in the doorway with the baby on her shoulder and smiled that polished church smile. She did not tell the boy to get up. She did not make space near him. She lifted the casserole dish instead and said there was plenty in the kitchen for Nia. Then she pointed out an open chair off to the side, halfway down the table, the seat for somebody who had dropped by. Not somebody's mother. Nobody corrected it. Mercer relatives shifted just enough to make the space real. One of Ellen's church friends patted the empty chair like she was being kind. Nia stood there with the diaper bag strap biting into her palm, looking at her son while the room waited for her to sit where they put her. The little coat was hanging on the hook by the front hall. Nia walked past the side chair Ellen had saved for her and went straight to it. Her daughter fussed against her shoulder. Nobody at the table said a word. Nia took the coat down, crouched in front of her son, and held it open. "Put your arms in, baby." He did. Her fingers shook at the zipper, just a little, but she got it up under his chin. Then she nudged his shoes toward him and said, "You're coming home with me." Claire's smile stayed in place a beat too long and then locked there. Ellen stiffened at the table. Grant kept his voice smooth. "Nia, we're in the middle of dinner." She never looked at him. "And I'm taking my son home." Her boy stood when she stood. That was the part nobody in that room could fix with manners. She took his hand and led him to the door while the whole Mercer house went silent behind her. The card reader blinked while the formula tub sat on the belt beside store-brand cereal, lunch stuff, and her refill. Then her phone lit up. Grant's transfer had come through short. Under the amount was one of his calm little explanations. Not angry, not loud, just neat and reasonable looking while she stood there with a baby strapped to her chest and a total climbing higher on. The screen. Nia looked at the number once, then at the card reader, then at the orange prescription bag. She ran her card anyway. The machine paused, then kicked it back. The cashier glanced up. So did the woman behind her. Take the refill off, Nia said. Her voice held. The rest of her barely did. Her throat tightened. Her eyes burned. She started sliding things back and forth on the belt, doing the math with her hands in front of strangers. Formula stayed. Lunch things stayed. Her pain medicine didn't. The cashier lifted the orange bag away. The line waited. Grant wasn't there, but what he decided had gotten there before she did. The orange pill bottle sat beside the grocery receipt like something left behind on purpose. Formula, sandwich bread, fruit cups, utility envelopes. All of it was spread across the kitchen table. Rochelle looked once at the bottle, once at Nia, then reached for her wallet and keys at the same time. No, we're going back out and getting this. Nia slid the bottle away before Rochelle could grab it. Leave it, Nia. Rochelle's voice dropped low and dangerous. That is your medicine. Nia pulled the lunchbox closer, packed the juice pouch, counted baby bottles, screwed on caps. A pain hit hard enough to make her brace one hand on the table edge. But she kept moving. The kid's routine is not what gets cut, she said, sharper than she meant to. Rochelle just stared at her, at the badge from Nia's reduced shift, at the rinse bottles drying by the sink, at that pill bottle pushed out of the center so lunch and formula could stay there instead. Rochelle's heavy key ring clanged against the stair rail. Before Nia even made it off the kitchen side of the room, she was already halfway to the front door, Busta Spat's lanyard still hanging from her neck. Church clothes tossed over one arm like she was about to drive straight to Ellen Mercer's house and say what nobody else had said yet. Nia caught up to her on the landing and grabbed the keys right out of her hand. Rochelle stopped dead. Give me those? No. Nia planted herself between Rochelle and the door. Down the hall, her son had gone still. The cartoon from the living room kept playing low, cheerful and wrong. Not tonight. Rochelle's jaw tightened. They think they can do anything to you. Nia's voice shook, but she didn't move. My children are not going to sleep hearing adults fight over them. That landed. Rochelle looked past her at the hallway, at the little boy listening, at the baby in Nia's arms. The anger in the house didn't leave. It just narrowed, and the key stayed in Nia's hand. Grant had the baby lifted toward the nursery counter before the volunteer finished smiling at them. Claire was right beside him, soft voice ready, nursery door open, everything looking smooth from a distance. Then the volunteer held out her hand and asked for the bottles. The change set, the diaper cream, her hand stayed there. Grant paused. Claire glanced around like maybe it would all appear anyway. It didn't. The infant care tote was still hanging from Nia's shoulder. Her measured bottles inside, spare sleeper, teething ring. All the little things that made the drop-off easy were still with the woman. They kept trying to edge out of the middle. Nearby church women had already started watching the handoff. Now they watched it stop. Grant had to turn back. Can you hand me the bag? Nia let that sit for one beat. Then the baby fussed, hungry and tired, and Nia stepped forward with the tote. The volunteer reached past Grant and took what she needed from Nia's hands. The boy's Sunday shoe had come loose. Claire had one hand out, ready to keep the whole sweet little picture going, but he didn't even look at her. He turned straight toward Nia and lifted his foot, small and automatic, like his body had already decided who fixed things. The nursery volunteer stopped with the sign and tag still between her fingers. A couple of church women watched, without pretending not to. Nia shifted the baby carrier off the worst part of her shoulder and crouched. Hold still. Her voice went soft for him in a way it hadn't been for anybody else all morning. She tied the scuffed lace, smoothed his pant leg, and sent him on with one touch at his ankle. Claire's hand stayed hanging there, useless. Grant saw it too. Everybody did. Then the adults started moving again, like the room could hurry past what the child had just made plain. Claire still had the nursery tag pinned to her sweater. When Grant started talking in the church lobby, he did it in that same measured voice, like he was smoothing over something messy for everybody else's comfort. We're just trying to make this easier, he said. Nia's had a really hard recovery. She's exhausted. She's carrying a lot right now. He said it gently. That was the cruelty of it. He was spending her body in public, using her pain like proof. Claire lowered her eyes and stood there looking helpful and wounded at the same time. Ellen didn't interrupt. The church women didn't either. They just got quiet in that way people do when politeness matters more to them than truth. Nia gripped the baby carrier strap so hard her knuckles went pale. Diaper wipes peeked from her tote. The baby started fussing. Hungry again. Tears burned up fast. But she refused to give him the loud reaction he was built for. So she just stood there breathing through it while Grant kept that pleasant face on. And let the room treat his control like concern. Out by the cars, the morning had wrinkled everybody, strollers folded, minivan doors open, church clothes already tired. Claire reached for Nia's son's backpack like it was the next natural step. Like her hand belonged in the exchange now, Nia moved before she could settle into it. She took the backpack cleanly out of Claire's hands and turned to Grant. Not her. Future signings and exchanges go through me, she said. Not through Claire. Grant's pleasant face emptied out. Claire's smile thinned so fast it almost disappeared. Ellen heard every word. So did the church women loading kids into car seats. Her son stood there between them, quiet, listening. Nia's hands trembled once after she got the bag strap over her shoulder. But she didn't soften what she'd said. Claire was left standing there empty-handed, and nobody could call that a misunderstanding anymore. Before school, the toast on Nia's paper plate had already gone cold when Grant knocked again. He was standing on the duplex steps with their son beside him, trying to keep that pressed, capable look on his face. "Do you have his reading folder?" he called up. Nia had the baby on her hip. She didn't answer right away. Upstairs, Rochelle had gone still by the rail. Then Nia turned, walked back inside, and came right back with the battered blue folder in her hand. She hadn't searched. She hadn't guessed. The sightward cards were still rubber-banded inside exactly the way they always were. Their son let out the little breath he'd been holding. Grant took the folder like he hated needing to. Nia handed it over and said, flat and low, "What goes with him comes back with him." He stood below her doorway with the folder in his hand, looking less like the default parent than the man who had to come back, because she still remembered everything. The tablet never turned toward her. Heather held it angled at Grant while Nia stood right there at the front desk with her work tote, cutting into her shoulder, the baby carrier pressed against her hip, and her son's backpack resting by her hand on the counter. "If you can just confirm the communication settings," Heather said to Grant, "I'll restore her notifications." Like Nia wasn't even close enough to answer for herself. Front desk staff followed Heather's lead without meaning to, so did the parents waiting behind them. Eyes went to Grant first. Grant barely hesitated. He took the tablet like this was the natural order of things. Nia's face tightened. Her fingers spread against the laminate counter hard enough to go pale. But she kept them there. She did not reach across and take back what should have never been handed away. Heather kept talking to him. The little screen sat between them like something neutral, even while it showed exactly who the room trusted. The tote slid down Nia's shoulder before she made it all the way into the little office. The baby was fussing against her side, hot and tired from being dragged across town on her lunch break, and her son was already sitting there in his coat. Grant had beaten her to it. Claire was bent in front of the boy, buttoning his jacket like she'd been expected. Heather looked up, perfectly calm. "We contacted the primary number first." Nia pulled her phone out with one hand. No timely alert, no missed call that would have gotten her there before this picture got built around her. Just silence where the notice should have been. An aide at the file cabinet stopped moving. The parents near the doorway took in exact view what the room was giving them to see. Grant prepared, Claire useful, Nia breathless and late with her work badge still on. Her breath caught when she saw Claire's hands on her child's coat. She swallowed the first sharp thing that rose in her throat and looked at Heather instead. Her photo ID hit the desk and stayed there. Nia laid it flat beside the sign-out binder, gave Heather the pickup code from memory, and kept herself between Claire and her child. Her son leaned toward her before anybody even answered. Grant started to speak. Nia didn't raise her voice, but she cut through him anyway. "Show me the rule that says I need his father's permission to take my own son." The aide stopped sorting papers. Claire's hand fell away from the half-zip coat. Heather looked from the ID to Grant, then back to the screen, and for one strained second nobody moved. Nia's fingertips pressed so hard against the edge of the card it bent a little. Then Heather had to release him. There was no policy she could hold up. No clean way to keep pretending preference was procedure. Nia took her son's hand, gathered him in beside her, and let the silence sit on the desk where Heather's excuse should have been. By the time Nia had both children with her, Heather was back behind the desk typing. She barely looked up. Tap, pause, tap. The front office printer hummed behind her. Children's art brightened the walls while Nia stood there balancing the baby. and trying not to let her son see too much. On her face, Grant stayed polished and still, as if he had nothing to do with how any of this had gone. Claire dropped her eyes and wore that small injured expression like Nia had somehow hurt her by refusing to be handled. Nia's son kept watching the screen. Kids know when grown people are turning something into trouble. Heather finally said she needed to document the interaction and note Nia's elevated tone. Not Grant speaking over her, not the delay, not Claire putting hands on her child. Her tone for 1 second. Nia's eyes glossed. Then she squared the taupe strap higher on her shoulder and stayed quiet. She was not about to help them write a cleaner version of what they'd done. The clinic window was half shut by the time Nia got there. Her son's folded pickup slip was still sticking out of her tote, and the baby had started that thin, hungry cry that meant she didn't have much longer. Before it turned into a full scream, Nia was breathing hard, one hand braced low across her middle. When the clerk studied her face, then the screen, and made up her mind about what she was looking at. "You're late for check-in," she said. "Let me call your backup contact." Nia said no right away. Not him. The clerk barely paused. Her finger moved off Nia's name and down to the old contact field, like that was the more reliable place to go. Then she lifted the desk phone and started dialing Grant, while Nia was still standing there at the glass. Women in the waiting room looked up over clipboards and diaper bags. The clerk sounded calm, professional. Nia was the one who looked frantic for objecting. She took half a step toward the receiver, pain flashing across her abdomen, and made herself stop. The phone kept ringing anyway. The phone was still off the hook when Maya stepped up beside her. She did not rush. She clicked her pen shut, looked at the clerk, and said, "Set that down." The clerk froze with the line already open. Maya turned to Nia, not to the screen and not to the late check-in note. "What contact and consent instructions do you want us following now?" she asked, just like that, like Nia had been the person to ask all along. The waiting room went quiet. The baby shifted and fussed against the carrier while Nia eased it higher on her sore side and tried to catch one full breath. The clerk lowered the phone to the counter without hanging it up. Maya stayed right there and waited. No talking around her, no deciding for her. Relief crossed Nia's face for a second. Then anger came in right behind it, colder than before, because the call had already been made. Still, for the first time since she hit the window, the room was looking at her for the next answer. The desk phone was still glowing from its last call when Grant stepped into the intake doorway. Pressed quarter zip, calm face, that looked like the room had called the right adult. "The clinic called about Nia," he said, already moving toward the window before she could get a full breath back into her chest. The clerk turned to him on reflex, not to the patient standing there with a baby carrier cutting into her shoulder and clinic forms stacked by the glass. To him. Women in the waiting room looked up over clipboards and diaper bags. Maya's whole face went cold. The clerk took one small step back, embarrassed now, but too late to undo what she'd done. She had already pulled him into a space that belonged to Nia's recovery. Nia's body, Nia's business. Shock hit first, then anger. Nia swallowed it so hard it hurt. She was not about to let this room turn her violation into proof that she was the problem. Nia took the cheap clinic pen when the clerk offered it. Her hand trembled once, then held. She squared the strap of her tote on her shoulder and kept her eyes on the screen. "He is not authorized for my care," she said. "Remove him. Speak to me only." Maya stayed beside her, close enough to back the line without stepping in front of it. The clerk's eyes flicked to Grant by reflex. He straightened his cuff and kept that frozen, managerial face on, like calm alone should still make the room return to him. It didn't. The clerk turned back to the keyboard. Nia waited there with the baby blanket slipping down her shoulder until the update was made, and repeated to her out loud. Only then did she nod. Grant was left standing outside the conversation he had walked into like it belonged to him. His name disappeared from the screen in front of his face, and nobody asked him to confirm a thing. Nia set the pen down and kept the counter between them. Heather was waiting at the office threshold before Nia even reached the child hallway. She had a printed communication plan sheet in her hand, held straight across the doorway like a neat little barrier. Parents kept flowing past them toward cubbies and classrooms, lunch boxes swinging, keys out, dinner already on their minds. Normal pickup was still happening all around Nia, just not for her. The baby blanket slipped off one shoulder. Her body was still sore from the clinic, still tight and tired in all the places nobody had to look at to judge her. Heather cited the morning incident, then conflicting pickup communication, and said all of Nia's exchanges would go through the office for now. For now, like she was a parent who needed managing. The aide nearby found something very important to do with a stack of papers. Nia's son saw his mother get stopped before she got to him. Anger flashed across her face and disappeared just as fast. She held still. Heather was ready to record anything bigger. Then Grant came in like none of this belonged to him. He went straight for the hallway door, one hand already on the handle. Expecting the easy pass he always got, Heather's fingers lifted toward the buzzer. Nia didn't leave her spot by the office door. She just looked at Heather and asked, "Quiet and even, does he need to wait in here too?" The aide looked up so fast her chair scraped. One mother near the front desk stopped pretending to stare at her phone. Grant's hand stayed on the handle, then froze there. Heather's professional smile held for 1 second along and turned brittle around the edges. Nia hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made a speech. She had only laid the same rule across the same doorway and made Heather show who it was really for. The buzzer sat under Heather's hand while the whole little office waited. That pause said more than any argument could have. Claire was standing by the bulletin board smoothing a flyer flat with her palm, like she belonged beside it. Grant's name was already on the family reader's list. Claire sat right under his. Nia stood there with a folded notice in her hand. The kind school sent home after the thing was already decided. Construction paper letters curled over the board. Parents glanced up, read the names, and kept moving. Heather stayed close with that tidy, closed expression she used when she wanted a choice to sound official instead of personal. She pointed to the sign-up sheet and said the volunteer list was already full, already handled, as if Nia's son had not just been placed into a public family picture she was never asked about. Claire's smile stayed soft, almost thoughtful, which only made it worse. Nia's son looked from the board back to his mother, confused in that quiet way children get when the adults around them are calling something normal. That clearly is not. Nia's face went still. She kept the flyer in her hand, under the family reader's banner. Grant and Claire were already up front like they had been placed there on purpose. Claire in her cream cardigan, Grant beside her, Nia's son between them with a paperback in his hand. Nia came through the multi-purpose room doors with the baby on one hip, and her toe cutting into the other's shoulder, and Heather barely looked at her before gesturing toward the tiny folding chairs, lined along the wall, just a seat for another parent in the audience. Juice boxes sweated on a side table. School library books sat in milk crates by the rug. Teachers and parents kept smiling toward the front like nothing about the picture was off. Nobody asked where Nia should be. Heather already had. For 1 second Nia's body turned toward the door. She could have left. Then her son looked back over his shoulder, straight at her, and stayed there waiting. So she stopped at the wall with the baby and watched them put another woman where his mother should have been. Nia took the little chair nobody wanted, the one against the wall that made her knees sit too high and her body ache worse. She set the diaper bag at her feet, pulled the burp cloth back up over her shoulder, and settled the baby without taking her eyes off the front of the room. Grant and Claire kept the picture going under the banner. Her son sat between them with the book in his lap, but he kept looking back. Every few seconds his eyes found her again. Nia held his gaze every time. She didn't duck into the hallway. She didn't force the room to come after her and tell itself she was dramatic. She stayed where he could see her and know she had not left him alone inside that setup. The reading started. Her eyes burned anyway. She kept her head up. Claire noticed it too. Noticed that the boy wasn't fully settling into the sweet little scene being built around him, because he was still checking for his mother at the wall. By the end of the event, Claire had found another way to make herself look natural in the space. She knelt beside Nia's son while Grant stood over them smiling down, like the room was looking at something complete. In Claire's hand was a soft cream reading bag with the boy's name on it in neat letters. She pulled out a take-home paperback and a little sticker chart, then smoothed his sleeve and said it was for their weekly reading nights. She said it sweet and easy, like that routine already belonged to her. Teachers smiled. A few parents did too. Thoughtful, that was what they saw. Helpful, the boy lit up and took the bag, cookie crumbs still on his shirt. Nia stayed where she was with the baby pressed close and her toe strap in her hand. Her mouth tightened at weakly, her nails dug into the strap until her knuckles changed color. It was not the bag. It was Claire naming a place for herself inside the child's comfort like nobody should mind. Then a teacher lifted her phone and said she wanted one quick picture. That was all it took. Grant stepped closer on one side. Claire stayed on the other, her hand still resting on the boy's shoulder. The banner behind them curled a little at the corners, and the whole thing looked clean enough to pass around later like it meant nothing. Nia moved before anyone could settle it into a memory. With the baby on her hip and her tote knocking against her leg, she walked straight in from the wall, reached for her son's hand, and took him out of the line. No speech, no apology, just that. Her hand shook when it closed around his, but she did not let go. The room stalled around the raised phone. Heather went still. A couple of parents looked from Claire's frozen smile back to Nia, like they were finally being made to decide what they had just seen. The teacher lowered the phone. The photo never got taken. Claire did not fight back. She drifted over to the refreshment table and turned herself into the wounded one, with the leftover gift bags still in her arms and the cookies going soft on paper plates. She let her smile go thin and hurt. "I was only trying to make it nice for him," she said, quiet enough to sound bruised instead of strategic. Two mothers moved in right away. A teacher did too. One woman squeezed Claire's arm and glanced over at Nia like she had just watched somebody ruin a perfectly kind moment. Claire never had to say Nia was difficult. The women around her handled that part on their own. They closed ranks with soft voices and careful faces, comforting the prettier story because it asked less of them. Nia felt the explanation rise in her throat, about the photo, about the bag, about what people kept calling help. She swallowed every bit of it. She was not about to stand there and plead with women who had already decided sweetness was the same thing as innocence. The cream reading bag hit Nia's couch like it belonged there, right beside her worn library books with the dew slip still tucked inside, and the little stack of pajamas waiting for her. Bedtime. Her son dropped to his knees, dug through the bag, and came up grinning with the book Claire had given him. He started repeating Claire's words back to Nia, talking about that reading night like he was offering her something good. The half-packed lunchbox was still by the door. The baby stirred and made that restless sound that meant the whole evening was already slipping off schedule. Rochelle stopped in the hallway and looked straight at the bag, then at Nia. She understood immediately. Nia didn't answer her son right away. Seeing that cream bag in her own living room landed harder than school had. He was only excited. That was what hurt. He was pulling Claire's little ritual into the center of bedtime with both hands, and he had no idea what he was carrying. Nia took the cream bag out of the bedtime space. Not rough, not dramatic. She just lifted it and set it high on the shelf above the dresser, where it could not run the room. Then she reached for the worn library book this house already knew. Her son started crying before she even opened it. He wanted the other one. In the next room, the baby answered him with a sharp wail of her own. The nightlight threw a weak glow across damp bath toys and tomorrow's school clothes, already laid out on the dresser. Rochelle stayed in the hallway and let the moment belong to Nia. But she heard the whole thing. For 1 second, Nia almost gave in. It would have been easier, quieter. She sat on the edge of the bed anyway, opened the old book, and started with her own voice, her own order, her own routine. The crying did not stop right away. That was the cost. The cream bag stayed on the shelf, and the night had to bend around that truth. After service, the fellowship hall filled up fast with paper plates, baked ziti, foam cups of church coffee, and women smoothing everything over with polite voices. Ellen moved through the room like she was setting the table nobody else had the right to rearrange. She guided Claire straight toward the children's craft table, into the open seat near Grant and right beside Nia's son, then turned and waved Nia toward the side with the food like she was just another grown woman, needing a plate. Claire sat down in cream and reached for glue sticks and crayons as if the warm spot beside the children had been saved. For her, the church women noticed. Their smiles said they approved. Nia stood off to the side holding a paper plate that was cooling in her hand, faster than she could pretend she wanted it. Her appetite vanished so completely she almost forgot why she had taken the plate in the first place. When Nia looked back at the craft table, Claire had gone further than sitting close. Nia's daughter was in her lap. Claire had the baby bottle tipped up in one hand, and a spit-up cloth was draped over her shoulder, like she belonged in the middle of that kind of care. Her other hand kept smoothing the baby's sleeper in those soft little motions she used when she wanted the room to see her as nurturing. Nia's son was bent over his project beside them, busy with crayons and glue, not even seeing the full picture. The church women did. They watched with those calm, approving faces that turned trespassing into sweetness. The baby was tired, already fussing around the bottle, overdue for her nap. Nia stepped in before she could talk herself out of it. She took the bottle out of Claire's hand, then lifted her daughter up onto her own shoulder. A glue stick rolled off the table and hit the floor. "I have my baby," she said, sharper than she meant to. She did not soften it. The whole table went quiet. The church parking lot was still holding heat when Nia buckled the children into Grant's car for his Sunday afternoon time. One of her son's church shoes had already been kicked off under the back seat. A paper craft stuck out of the Sunday bag. Claire waited at the open trunk with one hand close to the bag handle, patient as if she knew her turn was coming. Ellen stayed near enough to hear every word and far enough to act above it. Nia clicked the last buckle and kept her hand on her daughter's car seat, one beat longer than she needed to. That was when Grant chose to speak, calm, pleasant, already decided. He said Claire would bring the children back that night. Not him, Claire. The kids were strapped in, doors open, church women still crossing behind them. If Nia challenged it there, it would become a parking lot scene with her children stuck inside it. Grant knew exactly when to make the move. Claire just closed her hand over the overnight bag handle, like the arrangement had been hers all along. The porch light had already come on by the time Nia opened the duplex door. Dinner was still on low behind her. A pair of little shoes sat by the inside mat, and there was Claire, standing there in soft cream like she was bringing comfort instead of pressure. One child at each side, the overnight bag at her feet, a bakery box balanced in both hands. Claire lifted the box just enough to make it look thoughtful. She said she brought muffins, and she made sure all the children's things were together. She offered the box and the bag in the same motion, folding sweetness and logistics into one clean little performance. Rochelle had stopped on the upstairs landing without a word. The children looked from Claire to Nia, waiting to see which woman this doorway would answer to. Nia felt the anger first in her chest, before it ever reached her face. School was one thing, church was one thing. This was her porch. Nia did not move back. She took the overnight bag first, then the bakery box, nothing else. She kept her body in the doorway and left Claire on the porch smiling into a space she was not being invited into. Steam drifted from the kitchen behind Nia. Mail sat on the entry table. One of the children's jackets was already hanging just inside. Home was right there, close and ordinary in hers. Future exchanges go through Grant, she said, low voice. No extra words. Claire's smile thinned at the edges. Rochelle didn't say a thing from above, but her stillness held with Nia's. Even the children felt the change. The porch had a rule now. Claire was outside it. Nia only shifted her weight once the bag and the box were in her hands and Claire was still standing, where she belonged. Then she closed the door. The shaking started after the latch caught. She pressed her palm to the wood and stayed there until her breathing steadied. The next morning, city water trucks were crowded up along the curb, taking up half the narrow street. Nia stepped out with her son and the baby bag on her shoulder and found Grant still near his car, hanging around with that polished look that said he expected to stay in the middle of things. A foreman from the crew was already at the side gate asking who could open the building shut-off room. Grant turned like the question belonged to him. Nia didn't even look his way. She reached into her bag, pulled out a heavy ring of keys, and walked straight past him. Mail clicked in her hand. Her son slowed on the steps to watch. Grant's face changed for one quick second, just enough to show he had not known she had those keys. The foreman stopped talking to Grant entirely and followed Nia to the side door. When she turned the lock, the whole morning shifted with it. Rochelle came down the stairs in her dispatcher jacket, work shoes on, reading glasses still low, already moving like a woman running late and not about to pause for anybody's little power game. The foreman lifted his clipboard and asked how long the water could be off and who he needed to clear decisions with for both units. Rochelle didn't stop to take over. She pointed the clipboard right back toward Nia and kept going. Ask her, she said. She runs this. It was plain, dry, no speech around it, but it landed hard. The crew stopped reading Nia like somebody just standing near the house with a diaper bag and a tired face. Grant heard it too, out loud, in front of men who had no reason to play along with family stories. Nia barely had a second to take it in before the foreman turned fully toward her and waited like the answer belonged in her hands. Grant reached for the only thing he trusted more than the truth. He went to his car, opened his wallet, and pulled out a contractor's business card like money could put the room back where he wanted it. The city truck was still there. The utility door was still open behind Nia. None of that slowed him down. He was already on his phone, already saying he had a guy who could come by. Somebody reliable, somebody who could handle this fast. Then he held the card toward Nia as if he was offering help instead of trying to plant himself back on top of the problem. The foreman glanced over the way people do when they assume the well-dressed man with the easy voice might be the one who matters most. Nia's son watched from the step with his backpack still hanging off one shoulder. Nia felt her shoulders lock. Letting Grant's man in would make one thing easier. It would cost her something bigger. The contractor reached for the screen door like he expected it to swing open for him. It didn't. Nia was on the other side of the threshold with the key still in her hand. One shoulder braced against the frame, and she kept it locked. Grant was out by the curb in that calm, expensive way he liked to stand when he thought the day belonged to him. It didn't matter. Nia looked at the contractor once and said, "No, you don't come in." That was enough. The man's hand dropped back to his side. A neighbor walking by slowed on the sidewalk and watched the whole thing without trying to pretend. It was normal. Dust from the repair boots sat on the step and stopped there. No one crossed the line. Not until Nia decided they could. Grant's face thinned out for a second, like he was just now realizing money didn't unlock this door. Nia held the lock, and the house held with her. The foreman gave Grant's contractor one brief look, then turned his whole body back toward Nia. In the narrow utility hall, with detergent stacked on a shelf and a muddy work order clipped over a pipe sketch, he laid out the two repair options and started asking the questions that actually mattered. Which line fed upstairs? Which rooms couldn't lose water at the wrong time, when the shutoff would hit the children hardest? Grant had nothing. The contractor got quiet fast. Nia stood there sore, underslept, still carrying the weight of the baby gear on one shoulder, and answered every question in that low, tired voice of hers. The upstairs bath, the children's rooms, the school morning, how long they could work before the whole house had to shift around it. The foreman listened like her answers were the map, because they were. By the time he nodded and marked the job, it wasn't Grant's card moving anything forward. It was Nia. By the time the water got shut off, the duplex had already turned into Nia's system. Buckets sat by the sink, towels hung over chair backs, bottled water lined up by the fridge. Nia moved through it carefully, one hand on the baby bag, one eye on the children, telling Bass to go upstairs and not wasting a word. Her son carried his toothbrush cup upstairs like he already knew the routine. Devin came in with water jugs and waited for Nia to point. Rochelle was in and out, setting things down, not taking over. Then Grant showed up like he expected to find confusion he could manage. He found none of that. He found Devin, Rochelle, and both children already orienting toward Nia, already waiting on her next call. The blue water bucket just sat there by the sink while the house kept moving. Grant had brought an excuse to intervene. Instead, he got a room full of people who already knew where the day was going. When the repair crew finished, the foreman came back with a yellow closeout tag clipped to his board and a pen already in his hand. Grant was still close by, ready to step in like he was about to handle the paperwork. The foreman didn't even look at him. He kept the pen angled toward Nia and asked for the resident who could sign. "Miss Collier," he said, simple as that. Grant's hand lifted, then stopped halfway. Rochelle caught it from the steps and didn't say a word. The crew's attention shifted right on Nia, all of it. She was the one standing by the open side door. She was the one the house answered to. Nia took the tag, and for a second the whole porch felt too exposed. Like everybody could see how much that small motion changed. Her fingers stayed steady anyway. She signed her name and handed the board back. Grant had nowhere to stand in it except beside the truth he hadn't wanted to see. At the porch handoff, Grant stood by his car with Claire inside and the overnight bag sitting open on the back seat. Like the plan had already been decided, the house still had repair cones by the curb and a damp towel hanging inside the hallway. But he talked like that was all reason enough for the children to be moved somewhere else. "It might be easier if they stayed with us a night or two," he said, calm as anything, "just until the duplex settles." Claire stayed just visible enough to make the offer feel like a whole little family arrangement. Nia's son heard it. That was the part that hit hardest. He looked from his father to his mother like he was trying to figure out whether home was being renamed right in front of him. Nia felt the question in his face before she answered Grant at all. And for 1 second she had to work to keep her own voice from showing how much that cost. The uniforms were already laid out upstairs, lunch was packed on the counter, and a baby sleep sack hung over the chair for the next morning. Nia stood in the doorway with her toe strapped square on her shoulder and listened to Grant talk about how much easier it would be if the kids stayed with him one more night. She didn't reach for the argument he wanted. She just named the plan that was already in motion. The repair window, the upstairs bath, school in the morning, all handled. Then she said no to the extra night and left it there. Her voice stayed flat because the part that made her angry was how close he came to making her kids feel like guests in their own house. Grant's careful concern had nowhere to go after that. Claire's smile fell away. The children looked past both adults and back into the house. Because the house was still theirs, still organized around Nia, not around whatever rescue he was trying to sell. Rochelle came down from upstairs with a warm manila folder and a spare ring of old keys she had kept tucked away since their grandmother died. She set both of them down on the kitchen table right beside Nia's tote, on top of the bills and school papers already spread out there. The folder was frayed at the edge. The keys were heavy and old and plain, the kind nobody notices until they need them. Devin went quiet in the doorway. Nia didn't reach for either one right away. She kept her hands on the table edge and stared at the folder tab and the key ring until the room went quiet around her. Rochelle didn't explain it. She didn't have to. She left them there and kept moving. And for a second the whole table felt different. Not like family clutter, like a decision waiting to be made. Work boots were lying on the stoop, and at the side entrance the foreman had his clipboard out for the final notes, while Nia kept the folder tucked half inside her tote like she wasn't ready to put the whole thing on the table yet. Then she made it plain. Every after-hours call, every access question, every repair follow-up came to her, not Grant, her. The foreman stopped looking around for a better-sounding adult and wrote her name down. The neighbor on the stoop heard it too. Rochelle heard it too, as she watched Nia keep her face calm while the baby started fussing on her hip. Nia hated how exposed it felt, and it showed, but she stayed there until the contact card matched what the house had been saying all along. If somebody needed it, they were coming through her. During the repair closeout, the foreman held up the new brass key and asked where the after-hours calls should go from now on. Grant was standing right there with the exchange bag at his feet, like he still expected to be part of the answer. The foreman didn't look at him. He asked Nia where the emergency key belonged and whose name stayed on the follow-up line, then went still and waited. Not for Grant, for her. Even the children stopped moving. The neighbor on the sidewalk slowed down. Rochelle watched from the steps while Nia held the key in her palm and took in the fact that a stranger had just treated her like the person who decided. She didn't soften it. She gave the answer, and the whole porch had to sit in the pause she created. At morning circle, with the baby carrier digging into Nia's shoulder and half-zip school jackets, bunching at the doorway. The teacher held the cream reading bag halfway between Grant and Nia, and asked Nia what helped her son when the reading routine got him twisted up. Grant started to jump in right away, like he could just finish it for her, but the teacher kept her eyes on Nia and waited. The bag stayed in the air for a beat too long. Heather noticed. Claire noticed. The other parents did too. Nia wasn't used to a room giving her that kind of pause, and the surprise showed in the catch of her breath. Then she answered, low and direct, and the teacher nodded like that was the only answer that mattered. It was a small thing, but it changed the doorway. The school was no longer treating Grant's smooth voice as the finish line. It was waiting on the mother who actually knew the child. The cream reading bag was still in Claire's hand when Nia's son stepped around her and tucked it straight into his mother's tote. No speech, no hesitation. He just chose where it belonged. Claire's hand stayed open for a second too long. Grant looked down at the sign-in sheet and said nothing. The teacher saw it, so did the parents behind them. Nia had been steadying the baby on her hip, and for one quick second her face almost gave way. Not because she was confused, because that little move from her boy landed like relief. He had just told the whole room where comfort lived. Claire could keep smiling. The child had already answered for everybody, and the next adult in line was looking at Nia like she was the one to ask. By the bulletin board, Claire had already slid herself beside Grant over the helper sheet, like she belonged in the sign-up loop. Then one of the class parents stepped in, pulled the sheet away from Claire's reach, and asked Nia which day fit her son's routine. Not Claire's, Nia's. The pen changed hands, bulletin board staples, crumpled snack calendars, and parents trying to sort volunteer days before the work commute. All sat in the same messy patch of hallway. The moms nearby saw it and didn't rush to smooth it over. They let the moment sit. Grant's face tightened. Heather had to watch the parent circle make its own choice about who counted. Nia hesitated for just a beat, because being the one chosen still felt dangerous. Then she took the sheet and answered. That small move did more than pick a day. It told the room who the schedule actually belonged to. In the church fellowship hall, the sign-up pen hovered over the line while Ellen was still talking like. The answer was already settled. The volunteer didn't let it settle. She kept her eyes on Nia and asked whether the children could stay past lunch. Grant waited for the usual cue. Ellen started to answer anyway. The volunteer didn't move. Around them, church women glanced toward Grant, then had to sit with the awkward silence when nobody handed him the lead. Nia could feel the old urge to smooth the room over and make it easy. She didn't. She stayed there with the baby on her hip and let the pause keep sitting on her answer. That was what was changing the room. The church was waiting on Nia now. The neighbor had a stack of mail under one arm when she leaned over the porch rail and asked Nia if the side path was safe for the kids after the repair work. She didn't ask Grant. He was down by the curb with the car door open, standing there like he was part of the conversation, but nobody looked his way. The question went right past him and landed on Nia. The children saw it. Rochelle saw it from upstairs. Grant had to wait in the driveway while Nia answered about the wet patch, the narrow step, and what the kids should avoid. It was such a small thing, just a neighbor asking where children could play, but it made the whole block tell the truth. Around here, she was the one people asked. At bedtime, the cream reading bag sat on the dresser while Nia got her daughter into pajamas and tried to settle the room into something quiet. Her son was still awake in the bed, watching her like he was testing a question he wasn't sure he was allowed to ask. Then he asked if saying both women read with him would keep everybody calmer. Nia went still. Rochelle heard it from the doorway and stopped moving too. That one little question told her the damage had reached the child, not the adults, the child. He was already learning how to edit his own mouth so the grown folks would stay calm. Nia's face broke for a second, then locked back down, because now she could hear exactly what her silence had cost. It wasn't just her pride anymore. It was teaching her son to make room for the lie. The next morning, Claire reached for the classroom tag like it was already hers to hand over. Nia took it from her before it got to her son. Not fast, not loud, just sure. The line behind them slowed down. Visitor stickers were stuck on coats and stroller handles. Coffee cups were tilting. Lunch boxes were bumping knees, and everybody had to hear what happened next. Nia told Claire that classroom handling, sign-ins, and anything about her son's school day went through his parents, not through Claire. Heather heard it. So did Grant. Claire kept her smile in place, but it had gone thin. Nia's voice stayed flat, almost a flat, like she had to hold grief down with one hand and the boundary with the other. But the tag was already back where it belonged, and now everybody in that line knew it. Heather stepped right into the space between Claire and the classroom door. Then she told Claire to wait outside the child line and let the parents handle the rest. It was one of those small moves that says everything without raising a voice. Claire's smile tightened and stayed fixed. Grant's jaw went hard. The other parents saw it happen, and nobody could pretend the school was treating Claire like a harmless extra anymore. The visitor lanyard didn't buy her the same reach it had a minute ago. Heather had made the line real. Claire had to stand outside it, and Nia, with her baby on her hip, finally had the one thing she had been denied all this time. Not an apology, proof. The room was moving around her boundary now, and everybody there had to see it. Just inside the classroom door, the teacher asked the practical question that mattered. What helped Nia's son settle after lunch? When he came back, unraveled, Grant answered first, smooth and quick, like he was closing the deal. The teacher didn't move. She kept her eyes on Nia instead. Nia stood there with the baby on her hip and her son listening close enough to hear every word, and the room went quiet around them. Grant kept talking, but the sound lost its weight. Other parents noticed. Heather noticed. The boy noticed too. Nia could feel the old habit in her mouth, the one that wanted to make everything easy for everybody else. She didn't do it. She answered the teacher herself, plain and exact. And just like that, Grant's version wasn't the one that closed the room anymore. In the pickup hallway, one of the class parents already had her phone open when she turned toward Nia. The little circle of moms that usually decided who got the reminders and who got left to chase them had already formed. Up, Grant and Claire hovered near the office, waiting for the usual smooth handoff. But this time nobody made space for Claire to bridge anything. The parent asked Nia for her number and the best way to send class reminders. Then she added her to the group text right there in front of everybody. No big deal. No apology. Just Nia, on the same thread as everybody else. Claire stood a half step outside the circle looking like she had been forgotten in a room she thought she belonged to. Grant was outside the loop too, and Nia felt the strange sting of relief when the women closed around her instead of around Claire. She kept her voice short. One soft moment still could be turned against her. But the school network had picked a side. At aftercare pickup, the cream reading bag was open on the teacher's desk, and the blue folder that was supposed to be in it was missing. Grant was already close enough to act like Nia would fix it without being asked. That was the whole problem. He turned to her like the answer lived in her toad. Nia didn't reach for it. She let the pause sit there with everybody watching, then told him anything that went home with him came back with him. The teacher went still. Heather went still. Even Claire went still. You could feel the room hearing something it usually didn't get to hear. That Grant's clean little routine had been held together by Nia doing the invisible part for him. The empty bag hung between them like proof. And this time Nia did not pick it up and save him. Grant was already digging through the cream reading bag before the classroom teacher even finished looking up. He patted the sides, reached the bottom, checked the front pocket. Then the back pocket, like the blue folder, might show up if he kept trying. It didn't. Nia stood beside the line with her baby on her hip and her toe zipped shut. She didn't open it, didn't step in, just watched him run out of places to look. The classroom teacher, Heather, and the parents waiting behind them all saw the same thing. Grant losing that smooth practice pace he usually carried. The morning line kept moving around them. Coffee cups, backpacks, work badges, all of it moving past while he stood there with an empty bag in his hands. Nia's jaw tightened once, but she stayed where she was. This time, he had to stand there with the mistake he usually made her erase. At the classroom threshold, the teacher didn't let Grant talk his way around it. The late slip rested in his hand while she told him the real folder had to be brought back by him. Not passed around, not excused, not handed off to Nia again. Around them, cubbies were filling up, sight word charts were hanging on the wall, and the rest of the parents had places to be. The instruction landed in front of everybody. Heather watched without stepping in to soften it. Grant had to stand there with the consequence sitting on him. Nia felt the hit of that almost as much as he did, because for a second relief and dread came together. He was finally being made to own what he had been outsourcing to her. The school wasn't letting his tone close the room anymore. It was staying open, and the problem stayed with him. Later, Grant caught her at the employee entrance, right when Nia was trying to get through her reduced hours break without wasting a minute. She was in scrubs, badge clipped on, the baby tote closed tight at her side. He stepped in with that same calm voice, holding out the late return slip like it was a small favor. He asked her to call the school, excuse the miss, leave work long enough to smooth it over. Nia didn't take the paper. She didn't even move the hand that kept her tote closed. A coworker slowed near the desk. The security worker looked up. Grant kept talking like his urgency should sound responsible from the outside, but it felt like pressure once Nia stopped making his life easier. She told him no, not later, not after work, no. The door behind her buzzed, phones kept ringing, and he had to stand there with the slip in his hand while she went back to the workday he had just tried to pull apart. By the time he got back to the learning center, Grant had bought a fresh notebook, crisp and clean and expensive looking. Like that should settle everything. He put it on Heather's desk and waited for it to count as a fix. It didn't. The classroom teacher picked up the class reading chart, looked at the notebook, and then looked at him. The two things didn't match. Not even close. That old blue folder was what the class actually used. The notebook was just new paper in a pretty cover. Heather's face tightened first. Then the teacher's patience thinned out completely. Around them, the copier hummed and parents moved through the office with visitor stickers on their shirts. But Grant had gone still. His little substitute repair was standing there useless on the desk, and everybody in that office could see the difference between paying for something and actually knowing the routine Nia had been carrying. At pickup, the teacher went to Nia first. Not Grant, not Claire, Nia. Her son was already leaning toward her, and the teacher handed the take-home bag straight into Nia's hands while Grant and Claire came in from the side like they were expecting the usual easy handoff. It didn't happen. The teacher told Nia how the day went, what helped when her son got stuck, and what he would need tomorrow. She said it right to Nia, like Nia was the one who could do something with the information. because other parents heard the change in tone. Heather heard it too and didn't correct it. Claire had nowhere to stand in that conversation. She just stood there. Nia felt the old urge to smooth the room, to make everybody comfortable, to give Grant a little room so nobody had to watch him look useless. She swallowed it, kept her hands on the bag, kept her eyes on the teacher, and for once, the school was treating her like the person who handled the next day. Grant turned the backpack upside down on the church bench, and nothing fell out except a crumpled wrapper and one sock. He and Claire were still digging through the side pockets, still checking the seams, still looking for the quiet headphones and calming pieces they had expected to be there. The hallway around them was getting louder by the second. Nia's son was starting to fray, shoulders tight, face pinched, while Nia stood a few feet away with her toe zipped shut and her baby settled on her hip. She did not move toward them, not yet. The church volunteers saw it. So did the women by the folding chairs. So did Ellen. The polished little family picture that had looked so settled a minute ago now looked like two adults emptying a bag and finding out they had been leaning on somebody else's work all along. And Nia, the one they kept acting like could be left out, was the only person in that hallway who still looked ready. Then Ellen stepped away from the wall and asked Nia the question herself. She didn't ask Grant or Claire. Nia, her son, was still close to tears, and the church room had gone quiet enough that everybody could hear Ellen ask what calmed him, and where the comfort kit was supposed to be. That was the whole thing right there. The woman who used to run that side of the family was now standing in front of everybody, waiting on the mother she had spent so long pushing to the edge. Church women watched it. The volunteer watched it. Grant watched it. Nia felt both the old hurt and the pressure of being the only one who could make the room settle. She didn't rush into Ellen's rescue. She held still with her son on one side and the baby on the other, and the whole hallway waited on her answer. Nia didn't go to the bench. She didn't reach for the bag. She pointed once toward the side hall and said, "Take him there and let him breathe a minute." Her toes stayed closed. Her hands stayed on the baby on her hip. That was all she gave them. No rescue. No smoothing it over for them. Grant had to pick up his son and walk him himself. Claire had to stop hovering and actually follow the instruction. The volunteer and the women along the wall could see the difference right away. This wasn't Nia walking away from her child. It was Nia refusing to carry grown people through a problem they had helped create. And for the first time that day, Grant was the one doing the moving while she stayed back and made the boundary hold. Grant's voice went cold before he even finished the sentence. He held the crumpled church program like he was the injured one and said she was choosing conflict instead of cooperation. Nia turned toward him, shoulders straight, eyes tired and clear. "That's coercion," she said. "You keep using him to make me carry your part. I'm not doing your parenting work for you." The hallway dropped out around that sentence. The church women stopped pretending not to hear. Ellen opened her mouth and then shut it. Even the volunteer looked at Grant differently after that, because once Nia stripped the polish off his tone, it sounded exactly like pressure, not help, control. Grant's face tightened, and the room had to sit inside the thing he had been trying to hide. At the mouth of the side hall, the volunteer finally stopped doing the polite thing. Grant was still talking in that careful, managed voice. Claire was hovering with her hands half raised. Nia stayed back with her toes still closed, not chasing after the scene she had already named. The volunteer opened the side hall door and pointed the boy toward the quiet space Nia had told them to use. Not Grant's version, Nia's. "Give him a minute," she said. "Let him settle." Grant had to step aside. Claire had to stop touching and start watching. The women along the wall saw it happen in real time. The little shift that made Grant look less like the organizer and more like the man trying to talk over the room. Ellen went quiet. The whole hallway changed shape around one simple thing. Somebody believed Nia enough to make everybody else follow her lead. Ellen held the rehearsal program in both hands and looked straight at Nia. Not Grant, not Claire. The boy had settled enough to lean into his mother, her baby dozing against her shoulder, his quiet shoes scuffed by the towel. And the volunteer stood by the open doorway waiting for somebody to tell her what came next. Ellen asked Nia, plain and quiet, whether her son stayed for rehearsal or went home. Then she stopped talking. Grant opened his mouth and found nothing that mattered. Claire reached for one of her soft little smiles and lost it halfway. The whole side hall waited. For once, the Mercer side was not setting the pace. Nia was the one the room had to wait on, and everybody there knew it. Nia didn't hesitate long. She looked down at her son leaning into her side, looked once at the rehearsal room, and said he was done for today. That was it. No explanation, no apology. She turned him toward the exit, and the adults around her moved out of the way like they already knew better than to fight her on it. Grant stepped aside. Ellen did too. The volunteer lowered the program. Claire stayed where she was, but she had nowhere to go in the moment anymore. The boy stayed pressed to Nia as she led him out, baby still on her hip, the whole hallway opening up around her without another word. The room was finally making space for the mother who knew her child best. At the sign-out table, the volunteer set the contact card flat and turned the pen toward Nia. Ellen and Grant were still close enough to act like the answer should run through them, but it did not. The volunteer asked Nia which number to use for choir nights, and whose permission counted from here on out. Nia gave the number, she gave the permission. The volunteer wrote it down line by line, without looking away. Claire smiled thin. Ellen did not interrupt. Grant had no polished little correction ready, because the whole hallway could see what had changed. The child-facing role had moved. The calls, the sign-outs, the questions, all of it went through Nia now, not as a courtesy, just the way it worked. Claire reached for the children's bag and coat at the church exit, like she was still the one taking them home. Ellen stopped her with a small motion and told her to hand it all to Nia. She said Nia was taking the kids home, like that was the most ordinary thing in the world. Claire's smile tightened first, then her fingers loosened. The bag went back. The coat went back. Grant had to watch his mother pull Claire right out of the handoff and put the children's things back where they belonged. The church women saw it too. One simple transfer, and the warm little show Claire had been building lost its shine. Nia took the bag without making a show of it, but the room had already felt the correction land. The teacher caught Nia, her son, Grant, Claire, and Heather in the hallway by the literacy board and said they still needed an updated reading photo. Then she opened the little chair set out for the display and asked Nia and her son to sit. Not Grant, not Claire. Nia settled in with the book open across her lap while her son tucked in beside her, and the teacher lifted her phone. Heather saw the whole thing and did not get to stop it. Parents slowed down in the hall. Claire stood just outside the frame with that tight smile she used when she was trying not to show hurt. This time the school put the right pair in the picture. The one everybody had tried to push aside was the one the hallway would remember. Grant pulled up with the exchange bag and got out alone. The passenger seat was empty, clear as daylight, and Rochelle saw it from the upstairs window before anybody else had to point it out. Claire was gone from the handoff. No soft voice beside him. No extra smile. No one else to slide in front and make it feel cleaner. Nia saw the same thing at the door, with the porch light on and dinner smell drifting out behind her. The kids noticed too. They looked past Grant like they were waiting for the missing piece, and it never came. He stood there with the bag and no backup, and that little bit of relief hit Nia hard enough to make her breath catch. For once, she did not have to brace for Claire coming up the steps. Nia stood in her doorway with one hand on the exchange bag and the other on her keys, and Grant had to stay on the porch and listen. She did not invite him in. She did not soften it. She told him the exchanges were parent to parent from now on. No Claire, no middle step, no passing things through somebody else and pretending that was easier for the kids. Grant looked like he wanted to push back, then did not. Rochelle heard it from upstairs and said nothing. The children were close enough to hear the rules settle into the house, but calm enough not to be scared by it. That was the difference now. Nia was not asking for space anymore. She was naming how it was going to work, and the doorway itself held the line. A little later, the city worker came back with the final key set and the closeout papers, and he didn't even glance at Grant when he walked up. He looked at Nia and called her Miss Collier, like that was the only name he needed. Then he put the permanent brass keys in her hand and told her future access questions. Went through her. Grant had to stand there and hear an outside man name Nia as the person the house answered to. Rochelle took that in from upstairs without blinking. The kids watched their mother hold the keys, and the whole curb went quiet around it. The metal sat heavy in her palm, but Nia kept her face still. That was the part that mattered. The house had just been handed back to her in public. The next day, Ellen came to the porch with a choir envelope in both hands and started with Nia. Not with Grant. Not with a plan already made. She asked if Nia's son was going to keep doing choir next month, and said she'd go with whatever Nia decided. Rochelle watched from the stairs and didn't say a word. That shift sat right there in the air. Ellen wasn't assigning anything anymore. She was waiting for Nia to answer. Nia could feel how late that respect was, and how much it still hurt, but she didn't rush to smooth it over for anybody. She just stood in her doorway with her keys in hand and let Ellen wait. At the curb after the next exchange, Grant tried to talk like everything could go back to normal if nobody made it awkward. His car door was open, a child cup still sitting in the back seat, and he turned toward Nia with that easy voice like he was asking for a small favor instead of a reset. He said they didn't have to make everything so formal. They could get back to what was easy. Nia stayed on the steps and let him finish. Then she told him easy wasn't the same thing as respectful. That was the end of it. He had no clean answer, no smooth line, no place to hide the old version of himself. He just stood there with the door open and the silence between them doing the work. By reading time, the teacher had already set a chair at the front of the rug for Nia. Not Grant, not Claire. Nia sat down with the book open in her lap while the children gathered around her, and her son settled right beside her like he knew this was the way it should look. Heather passed the doorway and saw it happen. She didn't stop it. Other parents slowed in the hall, even before Nia started reading. The room had already settled around her voice. Claire stood off to the side with nowhere to fit. The school had spent long enough acting like somebody else could hold that place. This time, the right person was in the chair, and everybody could see it. By the time Grant brought the children back, he was standing there alone with the exchange bag and the blue folder, and he had to wait for Nia to tell him how this was going to go. She took the bag in one hand and the keys in the other. The kids went straight to her, like they didn't have to think about where home was. Nia gave him the next school handoff time, without rushing, without softening it, and he nodded and took it. Rochelle watched from inside. Nobody stepped in. The kitchen light was on. Tomorrow's lunch was already sitting on the counter. The house kept moving with Nia at the center, like it had finally stopped pretending it answered to anybody else. This one stayed with me like an email I'd opened twice, because the part I couldn't shake wasn't the big confrontation. It was all those small moments when everybody kept reaching for the polished answer, and the children, the house, and the real routine kept pointing right back to Nia. I left this story thinking about how exhausting it is to be the one holding everything together and still be treated like the extra. But I also kept feeling the quiet relief of watching that kind of truth become impossible to talk around. If this hit home for you, or if you've seen a story like this up close, tell me in the comments or send me another one.